There are moments in a life that act as a fulcrum, a single point upon which the entire weight of one's existence pivots. For Alfred Nobel, that moment arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of a morning newspaper. It was a spring day in 1888. He sat, perhaps with a cup of coffee, and unfolded the French journal. And there, in stark black ink, he read of his own demise. The headline was not kind. It did not speak of a brilliant inventor or a titan of industry. No, it proclaimed Le marchand de la mort est mort. The merchant of death is dead. He was reading his own obituary, published entirely by mistake. The paper had confused him with his brother, Ludwig, who had passed away in Cannes. But the words on the page were aimed squarely at Alfred. They painted a chilling portrait. A man who had built a colossal fortune upon the creation of materials that could kill people faster and more efficiently than ever before. It described him as someone who grew rich by finding new ways to mutilate and destroy. Imagine the feeling, to see the world's final judgment of you laid bare while you still draw breath. It was a mirror held up to his life, and the reflection that stared back was that of a monster. This was not the legacy he had envisioned. The shock must have been profound. A cold wave washing over him, silencing the world around him. Every success, every patent, every factory he had built across the globe suddenly felt like a stone in a great, grim monument to destruction. He was the man who had perfected killing. The world, it seemed, would remember him for nothing else. This premature glimpse into his own legacy became the catalyst for one of the most remarkable acts of redemption in human history. It was in the shadow of this brutal, mistaken epitaph that an idea began to form. An idea to reshape his name, to turn his vast fortune away from death and toward the celebration of life and human progress. This is the story of how one man's profound guilt and a deep-seated desire to be remembered for something more, for something better, gave birth to the most prestigious award on earth. It is the story of the Nobel Prize, a story that reminds us that it is never too late to change the narrative of our lives. It is a tale of a life spent creating the means of destruction, and a death spent fostering the greatest achievements of humanity. A journey from the dark workshops of high explosives to the gleaming halls where peacemakers and poets are honoured. It all began with that terrible, mistaken headline. To understand the man who would one day hold such power, we must travel back in time, back to Stockholm in the year 1833. Alfred Nobel was born into a world of struggle. His family did not have the vast wealth that would later define his name. His father, Emmanuel Nobel, was an inventor and an engineer, a man of great ideas, but he was plagued by financial misfortune. The family business went bankrupt in the very year of Alfred's birth, plunging them into poverty. These early years were lean. They were marked by the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing where the next meal might come from. A difficult beginning for anyone. Emmanuel, ever the optimist and dreamer, refused to be defeated. In 1837, he left his family behind and moved to St. Petersburg, Russia, seeking a fresh start. He hoped to win the favour of the Tsar with his inventions, particularly his designs for naval mines. For 5 long years, Alfred and his brothers grew up almost without a father, their mother, Henrietta, working tirelessly to keep the family afloat. Young Alfred was a frail and often sickly child. He was quiet, introspective, preferring the company of books to the rough-and-tumble games of other boys. He found his solace in poetry and the sciences, 2 passions that would remain with him for his entire life. In 1842, fortune finally smiled upon the Nobels. Emmanuel's perseverance paid off. His naval mines impressed the Russian military, and he was awarded lucrative contracts to arm the Tsar's forces. He summoned his family to join him in St. Petersburg. For Alfred, it was a dramatic transformation. He was lifted from the poverty of Stockholm into a life of affluence and opportunity. His father, now a successful industrialist, ensured his sons received the finest education possible. Alfred, with his ravenous intellect, thrived. He was taught by private tutors and quickly showed a remarkable aptitude for chemistry, as well as a fluency in multiple languages. Despite the newfound wealth, the lessons of those early years were etched deeply into Alfred's character. He understood the precariousness of life and the sting of failure. He saw in his father a relentless drive, a mind that never stopped working, never stopped inventing, no matter the obstacles. This environment, a blend of intellectual curiosity and industrial ambition, shaped the young man. It instilled in him a powerful work ethic and a fascination with the raw, untamed forces of nature. It was in his father's Russian factories, surrounded by the machinery of war, that the seeds of his own destiny were sown. A destiny that would be both brilliant and devastating. The world of 19th-century chemistry was a frontier of discovery, filled with wonder and immense danger. It was on this frontier that Alfred Nobel would find his life's obsession. It began with a meeting. As a young man, he travelled to Paris to continue his chemical studies. There, in the laboratory of the famed chemist Théophile Jules Pelouse, he met an Italian scientist named Ascanio Sobrero. In 1847, Sobrero had created something extraordinary, a pale yellow, oily liquid that he called nitroglycerin. It was made by carefully mixing glycerol with nitric and sulfuric acids, and it was terrifyingly powerful. Sobrero himself was frightened by his own creation. He had seen its incredible destructive force. A single drop, when heated, could detonate with more violence than a much larger quantity of black powder. He warned against its use, believing it to be too volatile, too unpredictable, and far too dangerous for any practical application. He had witnessed firsthand how it could explode without warning, from a simple jolt or a change in temperature. Sobrero saw only the peril. But Alfred Nobel, when he learned of this potent substance, saw something else. He saw potential. He saw a challenge waiting to be solved. Nobel returned to his family's business in Russia, his mind captivated by the possibilities of nitroglycerin. He and his father began to experiment with it, convinced that if its power could be harnessed, it could revolutionize the world of construction and engineering. Imagine blasting through mountains to build tunnels and railways, or clearing harbours for great ships. The potential benefits were immense, but Sobrero's warnings were not without merit. The work was perilous. They were, in essence, trying to tame a dragon. The liquid was a fickle and deadly master. It resisted every attempt to control it. This became Alfred's singular focus. He was not just a chemist, he was an inventor, just like his father. The problem of nitroglycerin's instability was a puzzle that consumed him. While others saw it as an untamable force of pure destruction, Nobel saw it as an engine of progress, trapped in a dangerously flawed vessel. He dedicated himself completely to finding a way to make it safe. He wanted to unlock its power for the good of humankind, to build, not just to destroy. This obsession would bring him great wealth, but it would also lead him down a path of profound tragedy and personal loss. The pursuit of innovation often comes at a cost. For Alfred Nobel, that cost was devastatingly personal. After the Crimean War ended, his father's business in Russia collapsed once more, and the family returned to Sweden in a state of financial ruin. But Alfred did not give up on his work with nitroglycerin. He set up a small factory in Hellenborg on the outskirts of Stockholm, determined to perfect a method for its controlled detonation. He believed he was on the verge of a breakthrough, developing a practical blasting cap that could reliably trigger an explosion. Progress was being made, but the inherent danger of the material remained ever present. On a tragic day in September 1864, that danger became a horrific reality. A massive explosion ripped through the small factory. The blast was catastrophic, levelling the building and shattering windows in the surrounding area. When the smoke cleared, 5 people were dead. One of them was Alfred's younger brother, Emil. He was only 20 years old. Emil had been bright and full of promise, a recent chemistry graduate who had joined his brother in his ambitious work. His life was cut short in an instant, a victim of the very substance they were trying to master. The weight of this must have been unbearable for Alfred. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Nobel family and the city of Stockholm. Emanuel Nobel, their father, was so shattered by the loss of his youngest son that he suffered a stroke, leaving him an invalid for the rest of his life. The authorities, horrified by the disaster, banned any further experimentation with nitroglycerin within the city limits. Alfred was now not only grieving the loss of his beloved brother and caring for his broken father, but he was also an outcast, his work deemed too hazardous for civilized society. Lesser men might have abandoned the quest then and there, haunted by the ghost of their failure. But Alfred Nobel was not a lesser man. Grief, guilt and public condemnation did not stop him. In fact, they seemed to steel his resolve. He believed that the only way to give Emil's death meaning was to ensure such a tragedy never happened again. The problem was not the power of nitroglycerin, but its instability. He became even more determined, more obsessed with finding a way to make it safe. He moved his experiments to a barge, anchored in the middle of a lake, away from the city that had shunned him. There, in isolation, he continued his dangerous work, driven by a memory and a solemn promise to tame the beast that had taken his brother. Working alone on his floating laboratory, Alfred Nobel relentlessly pursued the solution that had eluded him for so long. He tried mixing nitroglycerin with all sorts of substances, brick dust, sawdust, charcoal, anything that might absorb the volatile liquid and make it less sensitive to shock. The breakthrough, as is often the case in the annals of invention, came about through a combination of serendipity and keen observation. He noticed that a common porous sedimentary rock called kieselguhr, a type of diatomaceous earth, was particularly effective at soaking up the oily nitroglycerin. It was like a fine, dry sand. When mixed with the kieselguhr, the nitroglycerin became a malleable paste. It was a putty-like substance that could be shaped into rods and inserted into drilling holes. Most importantly, it was remarkably stable. It could be dropped, shaken, and even lit with a match without exploding. It required the sharp, percussive force of his blasting cap to detonate. He had done it. He had tamed the dragon. He had transformed the world's most dangerous explosive into a safe, reliable, and manageable tool. In 1867, he patented his invention, calling it dynamite, from the ancient Greek word meaning power. The impact of dynamite on the world was immediate and profound. It was the key that unlocked a new era of industrial progress. With dynamite, mountains could be moved. Tunnels for railways, like the Great Gotthard Tunnel through the Swiss Alps, which had been deemed impossible, were now completed in record time. Canals, like the Corinth Canal in Greece, were carved through solid rock, connecting seas and revolutionizing trade routes. Mines could delve deeper into the earth, unlocking vast new reserves of coal and precious metals that fueled the engines of the Industrial Revolution. Dynamite was, quite literally, changing the face of the planet. Nobel was a brilliant inventor, but he was also a shrewd businessman. He established a network of factories and corporations in more than 20 countries to manufacture his invention. He continued to innovate, creating even more powerful explosives like gelignite. His patents earned him an immense fortune, making him one of the wealthiest men of his time. He had achieved the goal he set out for himself all those years ago. He had harnessed an incredible power for the purpose of construction and progress. But this power, he would soon discover, had a dual nature. A tool for building could also become a terrifying weapon of war. As Alfred Nobel's fortune grew to staggering proportions, his personal life remained strikingly empty. He was a man of contrasts, a cosmopolitan industrialist who spoke 6 languages fluently and lived in a grand mansion in Paris. Yet he was deeply solitary and prone to bouts of depression. He once described himself as a miserable half-life, a recluse who was distrusted and has no real friends. He never married and had no children. His work was his only true companion, a demanding and all-consuming mistress that left little room for human connection. The man who was connecting continents with canals and tunnels felt himself to be an island. He travelled constantly, overseeing his vast industrial empire, earning him the nickname Europe's richest vagabond. But this life on the move only deepened his sense of rootlessness. He found solace in his library and in writing poetry, often filled with themes of loneliness and unrequited love. He was a man of science who possessed the soul of a poet, a combination that left him feeling perpetually out of place. He yearned for companionship, for an intellectual and emotional equal, But his immense wealth and the nature of his business seemed to create an invisible barrier between him and the rest of the world. His health, which had been delicate since childhood, did not improve with age. He suffered from chronic heart problems and sought relief at various European spas, though he found little comfort. He was a pacifist at heart, believing that the sheer destructive power of his inventions would act as a deterrent, making war so terrible that no nation would dare to start one. He famously said, "My factories may well put an end to war sooner than your congresses. On the day that two army corps can annihilate each other in 1 second, all civilized nations, it is to be hoped, will recoil from war and discharge their troops." It was a hope that proved to be tragically naive. Instead of ending war, his explosives made it more efficient and more deadly. Armies and navies around the world eagerly adopted dynamite and his other inventions for military use. The very tools he believed would foster peace by their terrible potential were being stockpiled for conflict. This growing militarization of his work weighed heavily on him. He was a man who loved humanity, who read voraciously and admired the great works of literature and science, yet his name was becoming synonymous with destruction. The chasm between his inner world and his public reputation grew wider and deeper with each passing year. In the midst of his profound isolation, a brief but significant connection brought a glimmer of light into Alfred Nobel's life. In 1876, feeling the loneliness of his Parisian mansion, he placed a newspaper advertisement. A very wealthy, highly educated, elderly gentleman living in Paris, it read, seeks a lady of mature years, fluent in languages, as secretary and manager of his household. Among the applicants was an Austrian countess named Bertha Kinsky. She was intelligent, cultured, and possessed a strong character. Nobel was immediately impressed by her, not just as a potential employee, but as an intellectual peer. For a short time, a warm friendship blossomed between the 53-year-old inventor and the 33-year-old countess. They engaged in long conversations about literature, philosophy, and the state of the world. Nobel felt he had finally found the kind of companionship he had been searching for his entire life. He may have even hoped for something more, a deeper romantic connection. But it was not to be. Bertha's heart already belonged to another, a man named Baron Arthur von Suttner, whom she had secretly been engaged to. After only a couple of weeks in Nobel's employ, she abruptly left Paris to marry him. Though their time together was brief, their correspondence continued for the rest of Nobel's life. Bertha von Suttner, as she became known, grew into a leading figure in the international peace movement. She wrote a powerful anti-war novel, Lay Down Your Arms, which became a sensation across Europe. She campaigned tirelessly for disarmament and the establishment of international courts to arbitrate disputes. In her letters, she would passionately debate the subject of war and peace with Nobel, challenging his belief that terrifying weapons could be a deterrent. She urged him to use his immense fortune to support the cause of peace directly. Nobel was deeply influenced by her arguments. He respected her intellect and her unwavering commitment. While he continued to believe in the logic of his deterrence theory, Her passionate advocacy planted a seed in his mind. He began to donate money to European peace societies and attended peace congresses, one of which was organised by Bertha herself. This friendship, born from a simple newspaper advertisement, connected the reclusive inventor to the very movement that stood in stark opposition to the military application of his work. It was a connection that would prove to be profoundly important in the final, defining act of his life. The day the world thought Alfred Nobel had died was the day his old life truly ended. It was 1888. The obituary, mistakenly published in that French newspaper, was not just an unflattering assessment, it was a condemnation. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. Reading those words must have felt like a physical blow. It was the stark, unvarnished truth of how the world saw him. Not as a builder, not as a pioneer of progress, but as a purveyor of death, the merchant of death. The label stuck to him like tar. This was the legacy he was set to leave behind. A name synonymous with explosives, war and destruction. All his internal struggles, his pacifist ideals, his love for poetry and science, none of it mattered. History, it seemed, had already written its first draft of his life, and it was a villain's story. The shock of this premature judgment forced Nobel into a deep and agonizing period of introspection. He was a man who had everything: wealth beyond measure, international fame, a business empire that spanned the globe, and yet he had nothing if this was to be his final epitaph. He saw with painful clarity how his life's work had been corrupted. The dynamite that built tunnels was also used to blast fortifications. The ballistite he invented as a smokeless propellant for firearms made battlefields even deadlier. His hope that the sheer horror of his inventions would end war had been a fool's dream. Instead, he had simply given humanity more powerful tools with which to destroy itself. The fortune he had amassed felt tainted, earned from the very instruments that caused so much suffering. The ghost of his brother Emil, the memory of Bertha von Suttner's peaceful ideals, and the brutal words of the obituary all converged in his mind. This moment of crisis became a moment of decision. He could not go back and uninvent dynamite. He could not erase the military applications of his work, but he could control what happened next. He could redefine what the name Nobel would mean to future generations. He realized that his vast fortune, the very symbol of his grim reputation, could be his instrument of redemption. He could use the money earned from the sale of explosives to celebrate the exact opposite. The highest achievements of the human intellect and the noblest aspirations of the human spirit. He would not be remembered as the merchant of death. He would write a different ending. In the final years of his life, Alfred Nobel quietly and meticulously planned his great act of transformation. On November 27th, 1895, just over a year before his death, he sat down in Paris and signed his last will and testament. It was a document that would stun his relatives and captivate the world. He had spent decades building a fortune, and in a few strokes of a pen he gave almost all of it away. He bequeathed the vast bulk of his estate, a sum that would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars today, to the establishment of a remarkable new prize. The will was specific. The interest from his massive fund was to be distributed annually in the form of prizes to those who, during the preceding year, shall have conferred the greatest benefit on mankind. He outlined 5 distinct areas for recognition. Prizes were to be awarded for the most important discoveries in physics, chemistry, and in physiology or medicine. A 4th prize was for the person who had produced the most outstanding work of literature in an idealistic direction. And the 5th, and perhaps most personal, was for the person who had done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. This final prize for peace was a direct nod to the influence of his friend, Bertha von Suttner. The man whose name was synonymous with weapons of war was now creating the world's most prestigious honour for peacemakers. It was a breathtaking reversal. When Nobel died of a stroke in 1896, the contents of his will caused a sensation. His family was outraged and contested it. The institutions he had named as prize givers were hesitant, unsure how to manage such a complex and unprecedented task. It took 5 years of legal battles and negotiations to finally establish the Nobel Foundation and award the first prizes in 1901. Today, the name Nobel is not primarily associated with dynamite. It is associated with genius, with discovery, with literature, and above all, with peace. Think of Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. Their achievements are forever linked to the legacy Alfred Nobel chose to create. His story is a powerful testament to the human capacity for change. It shows us that a life, no matter its course, can be redefined by a single, determined choice. It reminds us that our legacy is not written in stone until our final breath, and that even a fortune built on destruction can be transformed into a lasting monument to the very best of what it means to be human. Before you go, if you enjoyed this journey through history and the story behind the Nobel legacy, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Dynamic subscribe animation appears on screen. Join our community for more captivating stories that inspire, challenge, and ignite curiosity. Click the bell to stay updated. You won't want to miss what's next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.